Welcome, 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 everybody. Welcome from all the parts of the world that you're coming to this presentation from. Last time there were 27 countries represented. I'm Lani Morris, and co-founder of Map of Meaning International and co-author with our presenter of 2 books on the Map of Meaning. And it's my delight to welcome you all to the second of 3 seminars on meaning in unsettled times. So just before I introduce our presenter, this is a Zoom meeting format, and it's just a few pieces of information to give you, including, can you just turn off your audio and your video? Thank you. It's a Zoom meeting format because we believe that connecting with each other is really important in unsettled times. And so later in the session, we will be going into breakout rooms again, as we did in the first one. And we want to share our responses to an exercise that Mario will give us. So do please join the meeting room, even if you don't know a great deal about the map. Join the meeting that you're assigned to. And if you don't want to contribute, could you just listen to the others in the room? Secondly, if you have questions, could you please put them in the chat? And if we have the time at the end, we'll come back to them, or we may address them in the final seminar. Thirdly, do please turn off your videos in service of staying focused for the presentation, and also turn off the sound. Otherwise, we will mute you. And that always sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it just helps us to focus. Finally, if you have technical issues, do please use the chat to contact our tech person, Wai Ying. And you can find it under Tech Wai Ying, and she's waving. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce my colleague of the last 25 years, Professor Marjo Lips-Wiersma, Professor at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, whose original work has given us the Map of Meaning. So Marjo, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just getting dark here in New Zealand, so you see me against a slightly darker background at the moment. Welcome, and thank you very much for attending today's webinar. In this second webinar, we will look at meaning in the context of business as usual. But before we do so, I think Lani said that the last time we had 27 countries. I think this time we have 30 countries. The last time we had a little over 630 participants, and this time we have over 715 participants. And you know, one of the great worries of a speaker is always that you have far fewer participants in the next webinar. And so it is so nice to see that our community is still growing. So again, thank you all very, very much for being here. In the second webinar, we will look at meaning in the context of business as usual, which currently coexists with the great unravelling, which we addressed in webinar 1, and the great turning, which we will address in the third webinar. In today's context of business as usual, I focus on listening for meaning and asking questions from meaning. The purpose is to make meaning visible in organizations so that we can consciously create more of it, recognize it, and make amends when meaning is slipping away. Or, if that fails, strengthen our humanity by finding meaning in other parts of our lives. We will focus on organizations, but as a warm-up to the map of meaning, which we will also use today, I am taking you back to the conclusion of webinar 1. In webinar 1, we saw that even when things around us unravel, we can maintain meaning through individual or local level practices over which we have control, such as our consumption patterns, community gardens, replanting, etc. For example, from a meaning perspective, by eating fair trade or palm oil-free chocolate, we connect a private practice to a collective cause. This means we walk the talk and experience integrity with self, which is one of the dimensions of meaning, which you can see in the left-hand side of the map. We find meaning in realizing we're not taking such action alone and connect to a tribe in which we feel a sense of belonging or shared values. And as chocolate is becoming more expensive due to current droughts in Africa, it forces us to use our talents and creativity and use our full potential to find alternatives. Our small actions all add up to make a significant difference. The New Zealand chocolate market was long dominated by Cadbury. At the time, it was not engaged in sustainable practices. With customers choosing sustainable alternatives, these gained a lot more space on supermarket shelves, and Cadbury itself became much more sustainable, positively affecting thousands of growers and biodiversity. Do not underestimate private practices. What we buy, how we eat, how we power our houses, the transport we use, etc., will make about 30% of the difference. That is a big difference to the sustainable development goals, the other elements being governance and corporations. In choosing some daily actions that make a difference, we experience multiple dimensions of meaning. And as we saw last time, experiencing meaning has significant well-being outcomes, as well as productivity outcomes for the organization. Making meaningful choices also holds the ghost of overwhelm, negativity, and apathy at bay. But today we look at how we collectively speak about meaning in the midst of organizations and organizing. To remind you all, business as usual is the story of the industrial growth society. Success is measured through growth. In the context of organizations, business as usual expresses itself through competition, hierarchy, large amount of performance and efficiency measures, etc. Business as usual does not mean everything stays the same. All of us have gone through many changes in our workplaces, communities, or families. In organizations, we have seen attempts at creating flatter organizations, self-managing teams, organizational culture management, and lots of leadership training. But often the power dynamics do not fundamentally change, and larger systems factors get in the way of true transition. Some fundamental changes do not happen because capitalist, consumerist society works for many of us. Business as usual is comforting. We know the rules. We appreciate the comfort, opportunity, security, or status it gives many of us. At the same time, it feels like we may be asleep at the wheel, and the treadmill of daily work keeps us so preoccupied that this in itself reinforces business as usual. We will look at how to reassert meaning in this context of business as usual. But before we do so, it is useful to look at where meaning is situated in an organizational context. This circle represents an organization, which can be a commercial, not-for-profit, family, religious, or community organization. In the middle is the inspirational purpose. This is the reason for being, or a purpose beyond profit. For example, the Sustainable Carpet Company interface has as its purpose creating a climate fit for life. The outer edge depicts the system within which the organization operates. For example, a corporation or a family operates in a capitalist system, a hospital in a national health system. The next circle, which is the yellow one, is the which is the darker blue one, is the organizational practices. Practices that we often refer to as the prerequisites for meaningful work, such as a structure that allows for some measure of autonomy, an organizational culture that supports a sense of belonging, leadership practices that promote ethical behavior, or flexibility practices promoting life-work balance. In companies or not-for-profits, these practices are monitored and measured through managers in marketing, HR, finance, etc. And in a family, they may be monitored through regular check-ins. Clearly, in each organization, some practices are more conducive to meaning than others. Between the purpose, and the practices is where we actually experience meaning or not. This is where conversations about meaning take place. These conversations are largely about whether the practices and processes, such as measurement, meetings, planning, align not only with the purpose, but also the experience of meaning on a day-to-day basis. As I am talking about this example of organizational practice, says that you experience as meaningful or meaningless may already come to mind. When we listen for meaning, we can hear it. You'll often hear something like, "This is pointless." But such words are often rather vague and do not encourage action. We also have little language for talking about what is actually meaningful. This makes it hard to keep practices meaningful. When meaning is silent, it can unintentionally be managed out or forgotten about in decision making. In organizations, we create reality through what is spoken about and what is listened to. We are often confronted with business speak, and within this, it is very hard to use meaning language. There are several reasons why it is hard to talk about meaning. If meaning was easy to talk about, we would have conversations about meaning all the time. But this is not the case, and researchers have identified a number of reasons why this is difficult. In the green circle, barriers to meaning are identified. Starting at the top left-hand corner, it can be disorienting to talk about meaning in public places. For instance, a school principal in New Zealand said to us, "You're tapping into something that is a lot bigger than what we usually talk about at work." This is good and important, but also feels a bit more boundless than what is comfortable for me. Meaning may feel too intangible or too private, something we may not have already answered to in organizations where we like to be seen as competent. Moving to the right, another barrier is that people typically only talk about only one or two dimensions of meaning, such as making a difference or expressing full potential, which is then usually couched in business language, such as striving for excellence. These dimensions nicely dovetail with efficiency outcomes and are therefore legitimized to talk about. But important other dimensions, such as self-integrity and unity, are therefore often silenced. Moving to the left-hand bottom, leadership training these days often focuses on who you are and how you can act authentically. But most people don't have access to this training, and also, such leadership training can erroneously make leaders feel that they know more about meaning than others, and hence silences everybody else even more. And in the bottom right-hand corner, for example, a person complains about a change that means that they are shifted to another department. They will complain about the change in business terms. For example, they may say, "I don't understand the rationale for this," but not usually use human terms. For example, "I will really miss my colleagues." Such complaints are therefore often not understood as cries for meaning. As a result of all of this missing talk about meaning, everyday organizations miss opportunities to deepen people's engagement and their satisfaction. There are, as the yellow boxes in this image also show, solutions to this, grounding meaning in people's own language rather than business language, promoting various dimensions of meaning, engaging everybody, not just leaders, in questions of meaning, and engaging in deep listening for meaning. But all of these solutions are hard to achieve if we cannot make meaning and its loss visible. And if we cannot legitimize speaking about meaning in collective settings. Today, we will look at how the map really helps to stand strong in the forces of business as usual, precisely because it helps us to see meaning outside of ourselves and treat it as a shared experience. To make this real for you, we are going to do an exercise using the map. To show it can be used anywhere, we will use it in one of the most detested organizational practices. We will look at applying the map to a performance review or any situation where you give or receive formal feedback. Performance reviews are detested by both employees and managers. And research also shows they're not particularly effective. It was not always like that. In the 1970s, the intention of the practice of performance reviews was to sit down together in a constructive way and to see how things were going. In the 1980s, the practice got hijacked to how individuals were performing against targets. It became detached from its original purpose. And research shows that they are not particularly effective in developing human capacity either. I said earlier that meaning is not often talked about in the workplace, but actually we talk about meaning all the time in a certain way, which is a complaint or a worry. Once we are aware of this, we hear meaning everywhere. This becomes an invitation to bring meaning in or ask questions from meaning to ourselves or to others. Please read the quote on the slide and ask yourself what this person is telling you about their experience in terms of meaning. I will give you some time for this. When we listen for it, we hear that meaning is at the heart of many conversations. Listening for meaning is really important. And instead of offering sympathy or becoming sucked into a negative conversation, we can respond differently. The map is really helpful in responding differently. It helps us to get clear for ourselves what causes the loss of meaning and what we need to restore it. And it helps us to negotiate meaning with others. First, we will look at how it helps us to get clear ourselves. Here is an actual example of a person who clarified for themselves what is and what is not meaningful for them in preparation ahead of a performance review. Please have a read and notice the difference to the person themselves. The map helped this person to see where they experience the presence and absence of meaning. In the map and in using it for themselves, the person could stand strong in their own meaning. Now, looking at it, you might want to begin to think about some questions this person might have asked themselves as they looked at the map as a way to prepare. For example, what may they have asked themselves with regard to unity being present or absent in their work? Take a little time to see if you can come up with some questions you could ask yourself if you were using the map in preparation of a meeting or any other organizational practice. We know that over time, when people use the map a lot, they become very skilled at asking questions from it. And it is important to ask these questions in your own words, words that feel comfortable to you. So in this particular case, using the words that feel comfortable to them, the person might have asked themselves in full potential whether they still continue to grow and learn, or in unity, what it is and is not working to them for them in the quality of their relationships, or in service, what is helping or getting in the way of making a difference, and in integrity, if there was any ethical issues in the past that they did not feel good about or that they stepped over. They bring the reality of ongoing changes in the external funding into the review, not to complain about it, but to be reviewed against the reality of the systems they are working within. This reading of reality helps the individual to not feel responsible for fixing what cannot be fixed, and to not be responsibilized for this at an individual level by a manager. This is an example, reviewing their daily work by articulating meaning ahead of an organizational practice and in private. Next, we look at how meaning can be brought into business as usual practice in a more public or shared way. A third way of using the map is to put it in the public and shared domain. That is, to actually agree to use it together with others. Here, the employee and manager both have access to the map, and the manager might use it as a complementary tool to the usual review, or, as one of our certified practitioners and managers did, completely redesign the review process based on the map. He found that using the map was a much more useful way to do the review. The employee came better prepared, was proactive in identifying not only issues, but also solutions. And the review was a mutual quest in search of improvement of both the individual work role and also where organizational changes were needed to align meaning and purpose for the whole team and organization. Now it is your turn. Please identify one situation in which you could use the map on yourself or with another person. Take 3 minutes to think of a situation in which it could be useful to listen for meaning or ask questions from meaning. Just give it a go. For example, listening to your partner or a friend when they come home and talk about their work experience, or where you talk over a coffee about perhaps a next career move, or think about a work meeting. So take about 3 minutes to think of a situation where you could use the map and where it might be useful to you. Thank you. You will shortly be put in a small group. You have the following instructions. Whoever is ready, please start first and tell the others where you would use the map. You can also see these instructions on the chat. So the first one is, whoever is ready, please start first and tell the others where you would use the map. The others can ask clarifying questions, such as why would it be useful in that particular setting and what questions could you ask? And if there is time, try to look at least 2 examples of people having ideas about where they can use it. You have 10 minutes to do so. I hope you found a situation where you could try out the map of meaning. Our research shows it is very useful, and we have many people working with the map in all sorts of different contexts, which we'll talk to you about a little bit later. We also have developed research-based questions for each of the dimensions that have also been found to be very useful in organizations. I will not go through all of these questions, but here are some examples. Please take a minute to read an example of some of the questions. So basically, for each of the elements of the map there is a research-based set of questions. And what research-based means is that these particular questions access meaning and not, for instance, motivation or engagement or burnout, that we know that exactly these questions access the concept of what is meaningful to people. And so, we have these questions available for you. We know that meaning is hard to talk about, as we have already seen. In webinar 1, we talked about how we live in very unsettling times and how meaning steadies the ship. This is the same in organizations. In the context of business as usual, we see many incremental changes. But when we add all of these up, we find that many organizational practices are starting to miss the mark. Their intentions are not always bad, but over time, they no longer connect to their intended purpose. This is where meaning gets lost, and everyone in the organization starts to respond from an ungrounded and chaotic place, which can be very destabilizing, not only to our inner world, but also to our collective being in organizations. We no longer do our best work if we cannot talk about meaning. Making meaning visible and discussable is the best way to create more of it and steady the ship in the context of business as usual. The map shows all important dimensions of meaning. If over time you can experience them all, your life is most meaningful. In making all dimensions visible, you can withstand lopsided forces in business as usual, which, through pushing service or excellence, currently cause a lot of stress and burnout because the different dimensions of meaning are simply not balanced. Meaning can be seen outside of yourself in using the map, which in the context of business as usual, where many public problems such as stress or motivation are often individualized, the map helps to collectively recalibrate meaning, to be collectively responsible for upholding meaning. When the map is present, meaning is legitimized as an important concern and finds its own strong place next to the growth and efficiency concerns and language of business as usual. And in helping to develop participative ways of working with meaning, the map at a more fundamental level breaks through some of the one-sided leader-follower practices by establishing that we are all in search of meaning and all know what is and is not meaningful to us, and hence all should have ongoing input in aligning daily organizational practices with our human need for meaning. In conclusion, talking about meaning connects practices and the purpose. It makes meaning accessible and widely shared. This creates true engagement in aligning purpose and practices in the context of business as usual, leading to beneficial organizational and individual outcomes. In the third webinar, we will look at how to do meaningful systems work within and outside of paid work and organizations. Dani, back to you.
Well, thank you, Mario. Thank you so much for that presentation. As always, some really powerful information and highlights so much the importance of understanding and working with meaning in unsettled times. And I really want to highlight the fact that our certified practitioners here and practitioners have developed many simple and practical ways of using the map of meaning to bring meaning back into organizational practices. And they've done things like performance review, strategy, developing high-performing teams, conflict resolution, decision-making processes, change initiatives, and many, many more. And they've also done this within the corporate and public sectors and in a very wide range of industries, including education, medicine, the arts, international cross-cultural infrastructure development, and public policy. So all places where it would be easy to think that meaning is not deeply important, and actually it turns out, as we know, to be profoundly important to the human experience of work. So do please check these out on our website. Our practitioners are members of an ongoing learning community where we continue to work together to develop new ways of using the map in organizations of all kinds. And we do really encourage you to come and learn more so that you can help us with that work. Our book, which is this one here, The Map of Meaningful Work, gives case studies from our practitioners in the field. So you can read how they use the map to make a difference in large and small organizations. And if you're interested in gaining confidence in using the map of meaning, we run a number of very practical courses to help you do just that. We're a charitable organization because we've seen the value that the map of meaning brings to helping us understand this often sort of subtle, complex, what feels difficult to talk about issue of meaning. And we want to support people to be able to use it for themselves and in organizations, because it does help us stand strong in our values and in who we are. And as one of my friends said many years ago, if we can't stand strong in ourselves, how do we stand strong in the world? We know it's important to use the map, because if we don't use it, as another friend said, an early pioneer, Fisher Greenhouse, it's just marks on paper if you don't use it. So we really want to encourage you, please use it. Just try it. We've got the map up on the website, so you can always download a copy of it. There are TED Talks, there are articles you can use, and in there are lots of examples always. Use it to hear how people are talking about meaning in the workplace. And it took me a while to pick that up, and now I hear it all the time. Practice ask questions from the map. Put it up on the wall as a way of sharing about the map, because I think that's one of the really powerful ways you can do it. We had a colleague who put it up in the boardroom, and when they were making some decisions around redundancies, some person said, well, I guess in the spirit of unity with others, we could actually include the unions from the beginning, which they did, and it actually gave a very useful outcome. So I think that those sorts of things can make an enormous difference to people. And one really important piece of information, we'd love to see you at webinar 3, but we've needed to change the date. And so it will be next year when we'll be looking at the great turning and meaning in that. And no doubt many things will have happened between now and then. So it will be next year on Monday, February the 17th. Monday, February the 17th. And we will make sure that everybody gets information about that so you can join us for that presentation. Now, if you found this valuable and you think other people would be interested, please invite them along. They don't need to have attended the first two sessions. They would be very welcome to come to this one, the third one. Do look at the work we do. Do stay in contact with each other. Once again, we really want to thank you for attending. If there are no specific questions,
There's a question.
There are a couple of questions.
So there are a couple of questions there. I'll hand those over to Mario. If there's one there that you can see that you'd like to reply to.
Well, one, it was good to get some feedback that you had some fascinating conversations. And, you know, I find, particularly with my students, that when they use the map, they talk about that the conversations become more interesting, but also that they start to breathe more easily. And I always find that interesting. It seems to settle in a different place of our bodies when we start to talk about meaning. But an interesting question was about women and meaning and the participation of women in meaningful conversations. I'll give you a research-based answer, and that is that we know, of course, whether it's nature or nurture, that women are looking more for meaningful work, but we also and therefore seek more, for instance, jobs in the health service or in education or what have you, and particularly frame that in terms of service rather than, for instance, developing themselves or their full potential. So there is, but we don't know if that is nature or nurture. What we do know, if we look at at this generation of young people, and they express their need for meaning, it is as strong for all genders, basically. So that what we might be looking at might also still be a historical traditional pattern, and this may be shifting. What we also know, interestingly enough, if, for instance, if we look at blue-collar jobs where the need for meaning is just as great, and where possibly more men work, because pink-collar jobs are more the cleaning jobs, where women work in blue-collar more like factory jobs, and a lot of interviews have been done with people who do dirty work, and a lot of that is men. That amongst themselves, they do talk more about meaningful work, and they find it equally as important as women. So that is interesting. They might not recognize their need for meaning, but if we measured how important they find it, it is equal across all genders. So yeah, that is just some information with regard to that. So please don't think that this is something that only certain women are interested in. That is not at all the case, but they might recognize earlier that they need to have conversations about it, and they may also self-select themselves into jobs that we find traditionally meaningful.
Yes, there's a question about the link between spirituality and meaning.
Yes, so so there's sort of two answers to that. In tradition, research has been done in traditional, in settings that we traditionally associate with spiritual settings, such as, say, churches or all the voluntary activities that emanate from these sort of traditional institutions. And in those, we are finding that people are better at expressing their need for meaning, and they have a much broader language for it. And I think, if you've had, say, a theological education or what have you, that you have a very big vocabulary and you have more access to meaning language. So the speaking about it, if we ask a question, like if we stick a microphone in front of somebody's head and say, what is meaningful, you will find that in these contexts, people are much quicker in being able to express that, whereas most other people just go, you know, and again, that's why the map's so helpful, because people find these questions in the first instance often difficult to answer. Do they experience more meaning in those questions, in those settings relative to other settings? Not necessarily. And a lot of that is because they don't experience balanced meaning. So a lot of it is looking at unity. And people might not be able to express their unique identity in certain settings. And you know, and therefore not express their full potential, etc. They're supposed to have a stake on a certain identity. And secondly, it gets unbalanced because there is so much service, there is so much attending to the needs of others, that they may not be able to attend to the need of self. And where meaning becomes unbalanced, there is also a loss of meaning. So that would be in a spiritual context. Yes, there is the language. Yes, there is an expressed need, but there may not necessarily be the experience, and that is usually because of a lack of balance or because the identity is too constricted so that people cannot express their full potential.
Fabulous. What a fascinating answer. Thank you. Thank you for addressing those two questions, because they're
going in every which one direction. I mean, there's
you.
so many things to say in response to every question. Yes, but I hope, you know, you can also again see that for each of those questions, the map itself is actually helpful in sort of pulling some of this stuff back together again. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Mario. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We really look forward to seeing you on the 17th of February next year again. Please let people know if you found this valuable. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mario, for a splendidly inspiring and interesting presentation on the importance of meaning in unsettled times. So thank you, everyone, and good night, or good day, or have a wonderful whatever it is that's ahead of you. We really look forward to. Thank you for being here.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.